everybody. I'm Chloe Arnold, and we're here at CLI Studios for Movement Speaks. I'm really excited to be here today. We've got an incredible conversation coming your way, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, and then I'm going to introduce you to my colleague, Selima. So, I was originally born in Washington, D.C., and I moved to New York to study dance and to really pursue my dreams of becoming a dancer. I went to Columbia University, and I had the incredible opportunity to train with some of the best tap dancers in the world that were in New York, because as we know, New York is a bustling town. But I really got started because as a young kid in DC, there were all of these incredible outreach programs. And they brought in master teachers like Gregory Hines and Debbie Allen, and I was very fortunate to be able to have the opportunity to train with them. And it's through that that I really, solidify this idea from like 10 years old that I wanted to be a tap dancer. And then when Debbie Allen came into my life at 16, I started to see the world bigger, and I thought, how can I, be like her, ultimately, right? But from the lens of tap dance being my first language and love. And what was so amazing about her mentorship is she wasn't trying to make me be her or be a jazz dancer. She was instead giving me the skill set to understand, if you want to be great, this is what you have to do. You have to train, you have to work hard, you have to expand your skill sets across many languages. And so because of her, I went from primarily tap dancing to learning how to swing dance, African dance, hip hop, jazz, et cetera. And so that really helped me when I got to New York because, New York is just everything, and there was so much to learn. But when I was at Columbia, it was, the world and the dynamics of New York were very male-centric. In terms of tap, there was Bringing the Noise, Bringing the Funk on Broadway. There was Tap Dogs. There was Stomp. And then there was Riverdance, and then you had like Broadway shows. So none of those things had an avenue for Black women. No job opportunities. And so it was really difficult. And at first, I honestly thought, if I'm just good enough, I'll break the barrier and one of them will let me in the show, right? Or maybe I need to dance like the guys, and then that'll let me, maybe dress like a guy and be in a show. These were all the things I was trying to figure out, how I was gonna make it. And the other alternative was I could kind of simplify my skill set and be a part of a chorus line, but I had been training with some of the best tap dancers in the world, so to go then and have to do, repetitive time steps wasn't my passion. And furthermore, I really wasn't even welcomed in that world because it was primarily skinny white women, and that was the look. And if you were gonna be the one woman of color on the job, you were gonna be skinny, and I was never skinny. I've always been curvy, and I love my curves. So Debbie Allen said, I think you'll do better in LA. So when I graduated, I came here, and she was very right. It was way more fluid and open for my skill set, and I realized if I want to see women of color be treated well in the art of tap dance, I was gonna have to create something. And so she gave us free space, and we created Syncopated Ladies out of her studio, and that was in 2003. So it's been 17 years of my squad rolling together, rocking together, loving one another. And so my credits include Beyoncé, getting Beyoncé to love tap, share tap, hire us to come perform in London to launch Ivy Park. I've choreographed over 75 episodes of television. I was nominated for an Emmy for choreography. Syncopated Ladies has over 50 million views online. And my sister and I have the Chloe Mott Foundation, where we provide scholarships, much like we had growing up, for kids that are in need, that wouldn't be able to afford dance otherwise. And so I'm really excited to be here with you. So everybody meet Selima.
Hi, everyone. My name is Selima Knight. Some people also know me as Professor Knight. I am a professional dancer and choreographer. I'm a professor of dance studies at USC. I'm also one of the original founding faculties of the USC Gloria Kaufman School of Dance. So I have been there since the very beginning, building what we like to call the new movement. So this is a curriculum that is looking at dance from all different corners of the world, and we still have work to do, but we're hoping to really get there and make dance accessible to all bodies. And my career, you know, all of us start dancing, many of us, from a very young age. I started dancing at the age of 3. I actually would like to think that I started dancing before the age of 3 because we're talking about movement speaks. I start with my Black dance practices. So at home, I was dancing socially with my parents. My dad, rest his soul, would be vacuuming, and I would dance with him, and I learned about different movements and different things that were indigenous to like Black movement practices. And then at the age of 3, I started taking ballet formally in the studio. I've been dancing ballet actually the longest, but my area of expertise is really in jazz. And so I found that from that very young age, those really young years of dancing with my father, those Black dance practices showed up again when I started taking jazz classes. And then from there, I took everything. I took tap, I took hip hop, I took, at the time we called it lyrical. I think we've kind of dissolved that a little bit, and now we're talking more about contemporary. I went to the University of Arizona in my undergraduate studies and focused really on jazz there, but still, again, kept my training very diverse. After I left the University of Arizona, I went on to perform with Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines, which was wonderful. It wasn't my dream job, but what I'll tell you is that, just as Chloe was saying, many of these jobs that you do, they give you the tools. And so I learned about quick changing, dancing on a ship while it's rocking, going up into the air, doing a jeté, coming down. The floor is in a different place than it was when you started because the ship has rocked. So learning those skill sets about how to really maintain myself as a professional dancer over time. I then came back and I started my master's degree, but then I decided I still wanted to keep dancing. So I went on and I danced in a little tiny show that you might know of called The Lion King, the Broadway musical. I did that show for 3 years. And while I was in that show, I also got the opportunity to work with Beyoncé, which was a wonderful experience. So crazily enough, I was dancing in The Lion King and doing spot shows for Beyoncé at the same time. We did the Billboard Music Awards. It was a wonderful experience. I also had the opportunity to dance on tour with artists like Tyrese and Genuine and Tank at the time. Tyrese was also a part of the Fast and the Furious franchise, so he was doing that as well as the Transformers movie. So we were touring for his album and also touring because the movies had soundtracks and he was the main artist on the soundtrack. So there was a lot going on. I was also working with Jamie Foxx during that time, and then I danced with Chris Brown for a couple little spot things, music videos. So it's been quite the journey. But one of the things I'll say is that from having danced professionally in that time period, what I noticed was that there were things missing. And one of the things is I kept taking ballet classes religiously throughout my training was that I was often always the only one. And I know that this conversation has kind of become a hot topic issue, a hot button issue with our wonderful Misty Copeland, who has brought it to the forefront, and also dancers that have come before her, like Lauren Anderson, if we go all the way back to Raven Wilkinson and Janet Collins. Black female dancers that came into the fold and really had to deal with racism. I know Raven Wilkinson, when she auditioned to get into the company, she was coming behind Janet Collins, and she was let in because she could pass as white, whereas Janet Collins wasn't allowed into the company, and they told her that she actually had to paint her skin white in order to potentially be accepted, and she didn't accept the role. So pushing all the way from that time period, the 1920s, 1930s, into now, I feel very blessed that I'm able to be a part of this community, and we still have a lot of work to do. So in my master's degree, I decided that I wanted to focus on the non-traditional body in the ballet, meaning bodies that are maybe abled or disabled, and also bodies that are of a certain hue that get discriminated against and we don't see often enough within ballet. Also added to that, I did a lot of research on the invisibilization of Black dance practices in ballet, because what a lot of people don't know is that although ballet comes from European practices and we value that and it's a beautiful form, when we move into contemporary ballet, we're now talking about the inclusion of Black dance aesthetics. So it's Balanchine comes to the US and he starts working with dancers like Josephine Baker and Catherine Dunham and Tally Beatty and other dancers that are really pushing during that time. Also the Nicholas brothers. We also have the Harlem dance crew that we see in Hell's a Poppin' that are also a part of that conversation. So he's pulling that information. Balanchine is in New York. He's seeing these Black dancing bodies, and it's the multiple centers, right? We call it polycentrism in dance, that he infuses into ballet, and that's what we start calling contemporary ballet, where the pelvis comes off center instead of being vertical. So if we really understand the larger history, right, we can first appreciate the fact that Chloe and I are here, but also appreciate the fact that we've always been a part of the conversation, and as movement speaks, if we continue to look into the history and the culture of what has happened before, we can learn so much and uncover so much about this beautiful art form that we call dance.
I love that. It's so beautiful. I think it'd be really fun for just like for us to talk about Beyoncé for a moment, because Beyoncé is this massive mega star that, you know, we all love and appreciate. And I think what's so special about her is that she has really opened her platform up to help celebrate and shine the light on Black artists and especially Black women. So could you maybe share a little bit about your story, experience with her? Because again, you were doing Lion King. So how did that come to be? And then, you know, that's just really awesome. And I think it's such a testament to her dedication to making sure that Black voices are heard.
Definitely, you know, and we thank Beyoncé for getting her platform set up so she could do just that, because I think she had to come around to a certain point in her career where it would be acceptable,
exactly.
right? And I do see where even in her audition process, I do think that at some point there is what we like to call an ethnographer that she's dealing with when you're looking at her visual albums like Lemonade, that are diving deep into the cultural histories of what happened during NOLA in New Orleans and putting together this imagery that tells the story of Black people and Black history. So coming back to Chloe and I as the dancers, when she's in the casting process, the rehearsal process, she's looking for dancers that can tell that story. If anyone saw, you know, that wonderful piece that she did for Netflix, if you watched Homecoming, right, or you went to Beychella, you could see the story of traditions and Black movement practices being told, from the majorettes to the stepping, right? A friend of mine, Joe Brown, choreographs for Stroll Groove, and he did all the choreography for Homecoming. All of those things are part of the Black tradition. So I really feel like with Beyoncé, when she's putting a show together, she's actually telling her history and her story as a Black woman.
Yeah, and it's so amazing. When, you know, again, tap dance is originally an African-American art form born here in America out of the necessity for freedom from enslaved Black people, Africans, that were brought here to America. And so the art form, and historically, Black women have honestly been left out of the story. While they were incredible contributors to the art, if everybody pauses and thinks for a moment, what famous Black woman tap dancer do you know from the past? You probably won't have anyone to say. And there were so many impacting Black women, including Jenny Lagan. She was one of the first Black women to have a contract with MGM Studios, which was like the major movie studios in the early 1900s, which was a massive accomplishment for anyone. Anyone gets a movie deal. No matter who you are, that's a big deal. But she was breaking down barriers. She actually was able to wear pants instead of wearing like the chorus girl look, she had the soloist look. So you have so many Black women whose stories were left out. And so what was exciting about Beyoncé was that she recognized when she saw Syncopated Ladies perform, we did a video tribute to her for just being who she is and what she's done for the culture. And when she saw it and shared it on her platform, what she was saying is, we will no longer leave the Black woman out of the story. I have 150 million people on my platform, and 150 million people will see Black women tap dancing with excellence, and we will preserve the history from now on forth. And so she's really integral in the language of Black dance, because she's making sure, like you were saying, that the stories are being told and that the history is being explored. And it's just, I get chills when I think about it, because it's very courageous when you decide that you're going to use your platform to tell the truth. And it can go well and it cannot, but in her case, fortunately, she's thriving and it's going well. And I appreciate that, because she did it for all of us. And I think it's very important for everybody, you know, of all ethnicities, cultures, backgrounds, to understand the contribution of African Americans to everything cultural in the world that you experience and enjoy. And so that there's more equity and more respect for one another. And that's the same for anything. The more you know about anything, the more you will appreciate what you're experiencing.
Definitely. And Chloe makes a great point about diversity and equity. And I think you can speak to this because you teach on faculty for NYCDA, and I'm also a professor at USC. So being Black women, right, a lot of times we are the only one in a lot of the venues that we step in. We're the first. Even in 2021, we're still the first, right? So how do you feel being on faculty for convention, and what are some areas that you see could be kind of like, you know, developed upon, and what are some areas that you think you could really help in that world?
Yeah, well, you know, when I first got onto faculty in convention, now it's been 15 years. I've been on convention 15 years. I was one of the first Black women to be on convention, other than Laurie Johnson, who was teaching tap for Tremaine. Joe Lanteri, thankfully, has always had an open lens. His convention always had the most African-American teachers. We had also not just in urban styles. He had Duncan Cooper from Dance Theater of Harlem teaching ballet. He really understood from very early on the necessity for that. We had Martha Nichols teaching contemporary. We had Taja doing hip hop. We have Jared Grimes doing hip hop and tap, me doing tap. So I'm very thankful that I'm in a space that is incredibly, where I feel respected. However, when I look at the landscape and I look at my colleagues that aren't getting work as professors, as teachers on convention, who are truly top notch, I think it's a real disservice to you all as students. Because when you're a student learning dance, and you're not learning from some of the people that were instrumental in creating said dance forms, you're missing integral parts of what the culture feels like. Like, I would say that I've been doing hip hop dance since I was born, you too. Innately, by way of growing up in a Black neighborhood and community, it's part of our language. It is just the language. Everybody can dance. They're not going to dance class to learn. They know how to dance already. And so I think that I think that for the students that are coming in the room, that are also, it's not a lot of Black students getting the opportunities. I think that a lot of things need to happen. One, from the administrative standpoint, I want to challenge convention owners to create more scholarship opportunities to create equity in the room. And then, from the faculty side, to create diversity in your faculty so that the students of color that are coming feel like they're represented, and also so that the students that, so that all of the students get to learn about a more multi-dimensional perspective on how to move your body. And I love what you said. Can you tell us again,
Oh, this is polycentrism.
Polycentrism, okay.
So all Black dance practices use what's called polycentrism. So that means multiple centers in the body articulating simultaneously, okay? I also have another class on CLI Studios where I break it down like pretty in depth, so go check out that class. But polycentrism and also polyrhythms, she teaches tap.
Yes.
So polyrhythms, how do you take a rhythm and break it into duple, triple meters, and it still moves in one continuous, very, very harmonious tempo, okay?
Yes.
So polyrhythms and polycentrism, a huge part of Black music and also Black dance practices.
And actually, speaking to that, as I'm thinking about convention, right? When we get to convention, a lot of people are coming from studios. So I also challenge studio owners to diversify their programs. And for you young people, if you're a kid watching and you see a room and there's no diversity, you can be the change. I have so many students that have done fundraising to get their friend to be able to come to dance, or students who are reaching out to their classmates or reaching outside of their communities to bring in new students to create a richer learning experience. So don't feel like you gotta just wait for the grown-ups to get it right. You young people are so much ahead of the game. You understand equity from a more natural standpoint. And so I think use your power to affect a change and make the room reflect America, you know, and the world. I'm a global citizen, okay? I've been to 30 countries dancing, and I plan to go to more. And everywhere I go, whether I speak the language or not, I am growing. by way of being open to other cultures. And so I encourage just everybody to do that. And I'd like to ask you, what is it like being a professor at USC? I come out of the Ivy League world. I was almost one or two of the black women in all of my classes at Columbia University. I know what that feels like as a student. But what is it like in the world of dance? Because I studied film, I didn't study dance. And I think it's so amazing that you're there changing the game. And so can you tell us about USC and your mission, maybe how it is and where you want to see it go?
Yes, so my role in professorship, I really start from my training in higher academia. So I teach at USC Kauffman. However, I'm a product of the University of Arizona. So a lot of what is ingrained in me, right, the embodied knowledge, comes from the people that came before me. And my area of expertise, again, is jazz dance. So a lot of my training, in my undergraduate work was really situated in the school of Gus Giordano. So I was looking at Gus Giordano. If you don't know, it's a wonderful dance school out of Chicago. Nan Giordano is now the artistic director because Gus has passed. But they have a wonderful movement lexicon and kind of a codification of jazz technique that is great to teach in studio. However, something that I noticed is that what's left out of the conversation is this idea of the Africanist aesthetic in dance. So if you know anything about this history and the researchers who have done the work, there's someone by the name of Brenda Dixon Gottschalk, who we revere in the dance world. And she has put together a clear basis for the 5 components of the Africanist aesthetic, one of which is polycentrism and polyrhythms, which I've already mentioned. Another of which is ephebism, which has to do with youthful attack. So attacking the movements with a certain youthfulness, joy. We see that a lot in jazz, tap, and hip hop. Also this idea of high effect juxtaposition, which is that in jazz, tap, hip hop, movements that can be completely vertical can be juxtaposed by movements that are grounded. So this is my vertical, this is my groundedness, right? And they can sit side by side in a phrase, okay? Then we have what's called aesthetic of the cool. So there's this idea of the subdued, pulled back nature when you're taking a hip hop class, right? We don't really love the dancers who are A-E-I-O-U faces the whole time. We kind of draw more into the dancers that are a little bit more chill. They're behind, they're not behind the beat, but they're behind themselves, kind of enjoying it from a place that feels more authentic, right? And then last but not least, we also have this idea of embracing the conflict. So although we're looking at ways that dance can have finishes, for instance, if we're looking at pirouettes in ballet, you'll take a pirouette and you'll finish in 4th position or finish in 5th position. In jazz, the finish can be improvisational. You can do a pirouette in jazz and you can come out of that thing in a funky demeanor, right? And we embrace the conflict of reinventing that idea of finishing a pirouette or finishing out of a battement every time. There's no set way that you have to do it in jazz, which is very different from ballet. I just use those two as binaries. So with that all being said, teaching as a professor, one of the things that I notice is when you get into studio life, right, the general life of studios across the US, and also the idea of conservatory life in the institution, they're leaving out that information. And so what I see when people bring me in to teach master classes on conventions or to judge for dance competitions is there's no understanding of those foundational techniques that are very important to the technique of jazz. Polycentrism and groove is still a technique. Okay? And a lot of people will say, oh, the technique is the vertical stuff, and the grounded, groovy stuff is not technique. It's all a technique, because if it wasn't, everybody would be great at it, right? So we have to learn. There's rules of engagement for every form. You have to learn the rules, okay? And so those 5 components are part of the rules of engagement to be an excellent jazz dancer. So you have that. And if you could put that side by side with your training from a place like Gus Giordano, Chicago, or if you're Bob Fosse trained, who also has a lot of that stuff inside of his vocabulary, you're gonna be in good shape in terms of really understanding the bigger picture of everything that jazz can be. Another thing I wanna touch on is in the university, I do sit on the academic team that looks at audition videos. And so one of the things that I have made kind of my goal is to make sure that every single group that comes through Kauffman School has a very diverse cohort, right? And I've also, beyond USC Kauffman, done a lot of Q&As at different universities, et cetera, talking about how to build diversity. USC sits in the middle of Compton and Crenshaw. However, the school's makeup, I'm even talking the whole school, not just the dance school, doesn't reflect, right, the Black and brown communities that sit right outside of those gates. So how do we, like Chloe said, build scholarships and things so we really get those students invested in the school? A lot of them may be first-generation college students, so they don't have the resources, right? Some of them may have the grade GPA, but they don't have people available that can give them the information, okay? So those are the things that really, in professorship and higher education, and also moving back and forth between that and the convention world, I try to kind of teach on both sides how we can build and really grow this thing that we call diversity.
That's amazing. So to summarize for folks, because she got real professor-like on you, which was amazing, and I love it because it's so great because you're brilliant, and that's beautiful. The summary is that Black culture is being left out of the conversation when you're learning jazz, for example. And when you do that, you miss a whole component of what makes it what it is. And so what we challenge all of you to do is learn more. Come take, our classes here at CLI, of course, and dig deeper so that you walk through this life richer in every morsel of your being, because you carry with you pride and respect for all that you're learning and those that you learn from. And I think that's something we share in common, is we respect those that came before us, and we are open to learning on all levels from everyone.
Yes, and also I'd just like to leave you with this. I am a professor, but I teach young kids too. And so a lot of questions I get have to do with, well, how do you teach those components to kids who are 6 years old, right? Because we all start somewhere, and polycentrism for a 6-year-old may feel kind of paralyzing, right? So there's other ways you get them into the conversation. You can think about location. So if we're talking about Black dance practices and jazz is coming from the western tip of Africa, from Nigeria, or the southern tip from South Africa, or the West Indies, you can do movement phrases that teach the students, hey, I'm reaching to the western tip of Africa, now I'm gonna go down to the West Indies, I'm gonna reach through space on the diagonal. And now they're learning movement, right? And geography, and also about the people who really influence the form.
I love that. I love that so much. You're a wonderful educator.
Oh, thank you.
Truly.
Thank you.
And I feel so honored to be in this conversation. And I think, the most exciting thing is that you guys came to be a part of this conversation, because that's where it all starts, is through being open to one another and being willing to challenge what we know or where we've sat comfortably in order to grow.
Yes. Amen. So thank you all for joining us today. It's been absolutely amazing. I encourage you to come take both my class and Chloe's class on the platform. I hope you learned something today, and I hope you'll take this information into the world and do good.